What's good, dudes and dudettes? Welcome back to Just a Dude Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan, and today we've got a badass guest in Patrick Naughton. He's a U.S. Army officer, military historian, and now a published author. His book, Born from War, dropped in April, and it's all about connecting his dad's Vietnam experience with his own time in Iraq. We're diving into war, family, and what it means to serve across generations. Patrick's joining us from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Patrick, welcome to the show. Is there anything you'd like the audience to know about yourself?
No, I really appreciate you having me on the show, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation about the book and just the overall conversation overall.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Patrick. And so we're here and, we're talking with Patrick about his extremely interesting career from being an enlisted person to an officer to a military historian and now a published author. And so we're going to dive into your backstory and let's see what brought you to this point, Patrick. So yeah, go ahead.
No, it's been a long run, obviously. Joined the Army out of Hawaii. That's actually where I'm from, where my family's from. My dad was raised there as well. And then since then, it's just been, I started joining the Army just thinking it was going to be like a little 3-year thing and maybe use the GI Bill and whatever other benefits I got out of it. And then just move on with my life. But ended up, here I am 28 years later, still in the Army.
Yeah, that's, I call that a career last time I
checked. Yeah, right. It wasn't planned that way, but this is how it kind of turned out.
Yeah. And you've done a lot of stuff within the Army. I mean, I know we're going to get into talking about your book, but you've done some stints in D.C. and now you're teaching right at the Command and General Staff College.
Yes, yeah. So I've had a real unique career. I did an interagency fellowship through the Army, so I was assigned to a federal agency for a year as a member of their staff, and then after that, I did 2 years as a legislative liaison to the U.S. Senate. I was liaison between the Army and whatever that Senate office needed. So I got to kind of see the inner workings behind the curtain of how Congress worked. And then, a number of other assignments. And then now I'm an instructor at the Command and General Staff College here at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome to consider, and I know we talked a little bit about before we hit the record button, but, going from an enlisted person and like you said, 3 years, and now you're actually teaching the next generation of leaders.
Yeah, it's wild.
It is. I mean, it's fantastic because you think about it. I don't know about you, Patrick, but like for me, like when I started something, you never expect. I know sometimes we expect to go somewhere in our career, but then to get to a point and you're like, wow, maybe I didn't expect this. Or like you said, maybe I didn't expect being in the military for this long,
but
it's amazing.
It goes so fast. It just, just one thing at the other, one thing after another is just thrown at you. And I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. And one day I will figure it out, but I'm still in the Army after so many years. It just goes so fast, before you know it, 20 years are behind you and you're still rolling away.
Exactly. And at least you're still in good enough shape to be rolling away.
Somehow I'm still hanging on. I don't know how.
When we get to our age, Patrick, we start going downhill in our 40s and you start thinking, you get up out of bed in the morning and you're like, man, why is my neck hurt? I didn't do anything. And you're like, oh, that's right. Cause I slept and I'm in my 40s,
Yeah. No, I've had to really make changes, just to be able to keep up with the younger officers and so on. I mean, no alcohol, no sweets, just to try to keep myself in shape and, stretching and yoga and all kinds of other crazy things just to try to when I work out, I try to do the workouts that are like the most results with the least impact, rationing my knees and stuff.
And bringing up your mobility, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Making sure you can really still move the way you could. Because 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, they're a little hard to compete with when you're in your 40s and 50s when you get older, right?
Yep. I'm still hanging in there, though. I don't know how I'm doing it, but I'm doing it.
Hey, 28 years later, still doing it. So that's the way to be. So Patrick, and I loved it, and we're going to get into the book, but you grew up in Hawaii, and now I know the answer to this, but for the audience, how did growing up in Hawaii and the islands, how did that make you end up in the Army? What pulled you into this life?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, before I even get to my father and how that influenced me, Hawaii has a lot of military bases. I mean, there's every branch of the service is there, so it's everywhere. You see jets flying overhead all the time and helicopters and big aircraft carriers and all kinds of things like that. And not just that, but a lot of people don't realize that Hawaii has a real strong sense of service. So when you think of states that kind of have, big, strong sense of service where a lot of people join the military and stuff, you don't really think about Hawaii, but we do. We have the bases that are around us at all times. We had Pearl Harbor, that actually an attack that happened on our soil. We had the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which is a very storied Army unit from Hawaii of Japanese Americans. So you grow up around all that kind of stuff, and so it really influences you to join. And so there's a real strong sense of service within our communities in Hawaii. But really, it was my father. My father served in Vietnam. Even though he only did 2 years in the Army, 1 year in Vietnam, and then 1 year after that, I'm still in the Army at Fort Benning. It just had such a huge influence on my life, as it does for a lot of people who have family members who have served. And so he never talked about it growing up, but it was always there. When you're a kid, you're like digging through your parents' stuff, sneaking around in their closet
Right.
and stuff. So you would find pieces of uniforms, old medals and ribbons and things like that. And so that really influenced me subconsciously to then want to join the Army myself. So that's kind of really how it happens. That family, even though it was unspoken, still that family influence.
With your father being in Vietnam and, I don't want to say going the same path you did, but he went through college as well, right, in
He did.
Hawaii and went through ROTC and became an officer just kind of like you did,
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
or you
so I
did like he
started out.
did.
Yeah, so yeah, basically. Yeah, I started out enlisted, so I started as, I was kind of a bad kid growing up, teenager. I got into a lot of trouble and stuff. So I didn't get my stuff together until a little bit later in life. So I did enlisted, as soon as I was 17, my dad signed the paperwork
It's
allowing
like,
me to
"Get out."
join.
No.
Yeah. So I was able to join the Army right away. As soon as I turned 18, like a month after I turned 18, I was off in basic training. So did enlisted for a while, and kindly finally got myself together, and really the Army changed my life in that way. It gave me that discipline that I was sorely missing. And then that's after that, then I did finally follow in his footsteps, went to ROTC, went into the Army, served in my own war. And so all of that is kind of like what the book is about.
Yeah, and to add to that, to go into that, you kinda got this historian vibe to you too, and when did you realize that you wanted to dig into the past and, not just live it?
Yeah, my so same thing with my dad. He's a big history buff, even though he's not a historian himself. There's always history books laying around. There'd be like a World War II book here, Boer War, Vietnam War, and as a kid, not really knowing what that is, but digging through it and so on. So it was always something that was part of my family. My family's big into history, and then again, going back to Hawaii. There's so much history in Hawaii and Polynesia and all the different things that went on in Hawaii in the World War II and so on. So it was always just a part of my life, and it's something that I really enjoy. And so that's how I kind of became a military historian. Trained by the Army, so I hold what's actually called an additional skill identifier from the Army, designating me as a military historian for the Army.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, to think that you started off, going in enlisted and probably thinking, I'm just going to do a few years, maybe get some of these benefits. And now all of a sudden, here you are, a lieutenant colonel in the Army. You're teaching the next generation. You've written a book. You've done some really good research in the book that I've read. And I mean, to me, that's amazing. And, the premise of my show, Patrick, is to take normal people and share their extraordinary stories. And I think you fit into this gap perfect. You show that everybody, because from a working class enlisted military person, right, which is where you
Yep.
started, which most of
Yep.
my listeners do too, and you've literally worked your way up to become a lieutenant colonel in the Army, which is no small feat,
Yeah. Yeah.
from my point of view anyway. That's no small feat, so congratulations on that. And I just wanted to say, number one, thank you for your service, because I think for all our service members out there, we owe a debt of gratitude to you and your brothers and sisters, just for the fact that we can still walk this land so freely compared to other countries. So, number one, thank you for that. But number two, like I said, your book taught me more about Vietnam than, 12 years of general education and going through high
Yeah.
school. And I just thought that was, for people my age in their 40s, we know what Vietnam is because our parents either lived through it or were very close to it. Like my father was right at the tail end. He went and did his physical, but then the draft stopped, so he didn't go in. But it's like I think a lot of people my age have their parents that, just like you, were in Vietnam, and we don't know much about it. And for like my uncles and that were in it, they never talked about it, so I'm sure it was
Yeah.
probably wasn't easy for you to just go to your dad and say, "Hey dad, tell me everything about what happened." You probably had to coax that out, didn't you?
Yeah. No, definitely. So in April of 2025 is the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. And that's when the book came out, to try to capitalize on that date. But yeah, my dad rarely ever talked about it. And so when we redug up all these old letters that he had sent home in this diary that he kept in Vietnam during the war. That really was the genesis of what started the the book. So yeah, being able to take those documents, as a historian, as well as I'm looking at my father's writing, but also analyzing it as a historian as well. And then being able to talk to him about it. And I researched and I ran down a whole bunch of people that he served with. Was able to interview them for the book. So it was really, really fascinating to be able to do that as a historian, number one, is, look through all these old documents and then actually be able to still talk to a living person that lived through that time.
Yeah.
But overlaying down top of that, it was my father, which is overlaid on top of all of that, which really made it really, really fascinating.
Yeah, it really this is a book about a family of a family of service. Your dad, we had our own wars that were similar. Vietnam, we had Iraq, Afghanistan. And, that's what led us to the book, and the book's called Born from War, and, it sounds heavy, but let me tell you, it reads really awesome. It's, just the comparisons, the things that you learn is amazing, and, so Patrick, if you wanna just give us kind of an elevator pitch, what's the book about, and why did you decide to write it?
Yeah, so it's called Born from War: A Soldier's Quest to Understand Vietnam, Iraq, and the Generational Impact of Conflict. And what really, started the book and what it's about is I started writing articles and so on back in about 2017. I started doing that. And, if you had seen my early writing, you would be just as horrified of it by it as I am. But, I really had to work on it. And I'd always wanted to write a book. And then, like I said, once we discovered my father's paperwork, that was really the genesis. Oh man, this would make a really interesting book. If I was able to compare and contrast of how his experience in the military, even though he didn't talk about it at all, how that influenced me to then join the army, and then how go fight in my own war, and then what were there any similarities between the those two conflicts? And after doing the research, there was a whole bunch of similarities, and that's what really makes the book interesting. So that's what the book is about. It's a human experience story, like you said, a generational story of a father and son at war, but it also talks about a lot of, national strategic stuff. It talks about, again, the human experience. It has war stories if you want that. It encapsulates everything. It's not just another war book, which is, I hope.
Yeah. No, and Patrick, that's exactly what I thought about it, because not only are you taking it from, a family point of view with your family, but, learning about your aunt and, which is your dad's sister, right? And how she had a completely different view of the war
Yeah.
than what your dad did, but still was respectful to the service because like you said, and that's what I found very interesting in the beginning of the book is to hear, and just like you said, is how the folks in Hawaii, how dedicated to service they are. And for those of us on the mainland, we don't think about, we think about Pearl Harbor, but Hawaii was actually the place that was attacked. So it does it when you sit there and think about it, you're like, okay, this makes sense why you would have a line to service.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Hawaii's on the front lines again. If you think about, China, one of our biggest peer adversaries, if war was to break out, the first place on the front lines is Hawaii all over again. But yeah, I wanted to touch on something you said earlier about, Vietnam and how that's kind of not really taught in schools, or when it is, it's really glossed over,
Yeah, it's
or
just like a
it's
very like, hey,
yeah,
Vietnam happened from 60 to set, right? And
right,
you're like,
yeah,
it just gives you the years and that was it.
yeah, or it's really remembered as this very ugly war with protesters and and hippies and war crimes and all these other types of things. And so the book, also I really wanted to tell the full story as much as I could about Vietnam, even though it's just through that one year that my dad was there for a new generation who never learned about it. And also, there's this real danger. Korea became known as the Forgotten War,
Yes.
and that's starting to happen right now with Vietnam as well, really becoming this forgotten war. And so my biggest fear is that our latest experience in Iraq and Afghanistan is now on its way to becoming yet again another forgotten war.
And it
So I really want to tell that story and connect all of that.
Yeah, and Patrick, from your and this probably more than anybody being, having that historian roots, but if we don't remember the past, we're doomed to repeat it, especially if we don't learn from it. And, to see there, like thinking about how you thoughtfully explained the Vietnam War, and how it was more, I forget what the pamphlet was that your dad got, but I know that you talked about a pamphlet when he got in country, and it was basically teaching him how to be good stewards towards the folks that were living there.
Right.
Which
Yeah.
from a military, from an outsider thinking of a military campaign, the last thing you think about is, oh, we're going to give pamphlets to our soldiers to teach them how to be good stewards to the Vietnamese people.
Yeah.
You think
Yeah.
that they're for one reason, for war,
Yeah.
right? But really,
Yeah.
they were there for so much more.
Yeah, it's a big, it's a big piece of conflict. You don't just like the movies. You're not just kicking in doors and blowing things up. I mean, you've got a whole civilian populace that you're interfacing with on a daily basis, and
Yeah.
that can really derail the whole war just as quickly as dropping a bomb in the wrong place in the way that you're treating that local populace. So yeah, Vietnam, they had these little pamphlets, real little printed things. The one you mentioned is called pacification.
But that was, I
Um,
could not remember it for the heck of me. But yes, that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of pamphlets like that, you basically in Vietnam, you got in country, they gave you this pamphlet and they were like, "All right, you're good." Released you out into the wild, and that was supposed to train you to be ready to interface with this local community. The same thing with my wars, except we had PowerPoints or we
Yeah.
had a little online class that we did, and we were expected to then be able to function in this ancient land of Mesopotamia and not mess things up. And yeah, it's not usually as effective as as you hope
No.
it would be.
No, I can't imagine just I mean, even, thinking now when you went, to Iraq, I think they give you a PowerPoint. It's just essentially the
Mm,
same thing, only you can't
yep.
carry it with you, right?
Yeah.
But you're probably sitting there going, I didn't really think about that. Well, I'm sure they probably try to prepare you as much as possible before deployment, but it is funny. I did have a former military counterintelligence specialist on a couple of weeks ago, and that was the first time I really even thought about, hey, not only are we there to stop, violence or, try to stop attacks or whatever, but we've got to work with the people too and make sure that they can set up a stable government and make sure that they understand that we're not there just to be an enemy. We're there to help them. And it's like, as a regular citizen, you don't realize that all that stuff goes into these conflicts.
Yeah, it's that counterinsurgency riddle that, we couldn't solve in Vietnam. We didn't do a good job. In Afghanistan, obviously, it didn't work. In Iraq, the jury's still out on that. But
Right.
yeah, so it's a challenge, and it's really hard. If you take an 18, 19-year-old kid from, I don't know, name anywhere, name Akron, Ohio, and then throw them into, like I said, the ancient land of Mesopotamia, and expect them to be able to function in this ancient culture with just a couple of PowerPoints and some classes and maybe a little hip pocket graphic training aid. I
Yeah.
mean, that's really hard to do.
Yeah, and it's, and I've heard the same thing from some of my friends that did go off to Iraq or Afghanistan and they come back and they're like, you want to talk about a different world?
Yeah,
It's a different world. It's like our world, not even like our world 200 years ago when this country started. They're like, even think more ancient than that. And I'm
yeah, it's
like,
a
yeah,
different culture.
I can't really prepare you for that, can they? I mean,
Yeah, no, it's hard.
as much as they try, I'm sure you're probably just like, we could tell you as much as you want, but until you actually get in there and experience, it's probably
Yeah.
words can't explain it.
Yeah, I will say Iraq, it's a beautiful culture as well. I mean, it's not just
Yeah.
we like to
And
point to the negatives, and it's beautiful ancient culture.
it's funny, you're not the first, like, the person that I talked to a couple weeks ago said the same thing. He
Oh,
goes,
yeah.
we don't teach enough about the culture and how beautiful it is to our people
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
go over there. And but yeah, no, that's great, Patrick. And I wanted to lead up on that and say, so your time in Iraq, can you kind of give the listeners a little bit of a taste of what you went through that kind of echoed what your dad went through? And without giving the book away, of course.
Yeah, right. No, in all of my research and all the articles I've done about military history, and then in writing this book, what's always so interesting or even shocking a little bit is how timeless military service is. You read old, Civil War, American Civil War letters or diaries and things like that, and yeah, the weapons change, the technology changes, the enemy changes, the uniform changes, but that core part of being a soldier is so timeless that it's just so shocking to see that. And so that was kind of really the thing that struck me the most, is that a lot of things that my dad went through, I went through the same thing, even though I didn't see as much combat as him. But still, a lot of the experiences that we went through at Fort Benning and our training, and then working in these foreign environments, and interfacing with these foreign troops and things like that, all that stuff, was really quite shocking to find so many similarities. And that was really the most, I guess, fascinating part of all that research.
I even noticed your same similarities about your foot issues
Yeah, yeah.
between your dad and yourself, which is something I always happen to hear from a bunch of military folks. I mean, which you think about it, you're on your feet most of the
Yeah.
time. So having foot problems is probably not too uncommon, I have to imagine.
Yeah, if you're gonna join the army, and especially join the infantry, and you've never walked, like, far distances, I would start doing that right away to get you
Yeah,
toughen
start
your feet
toughening
up.
up those feet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I
our
know
our
for
our our culture, our society is, we just sit in chairs all day in our offices
yeah,
and so on.
exactly.
And then when you're thrown into this basic training environment and you're like, holy smokes, wearing this body armor and weight and boots and you've never worn in your life. I mean, it racks your body unless you've really been somebody
Yeah.
who, hikes a lot or goes outdoors a lot and things like that.
Yeah, it's funny because I've had, so myself, no military service, Patrick, but I was a police officer for 13 years. And so I know what it's like to be on your
Yeah.
feet with boots, and especially if they're like standard issue boots, I know they're not the best,
Yeah.
so it's like you're always finding the best footwear for you that's within regulations that you could get away with,
Yeah.
because you're like, man, if you're going to be on your feet all day, that's the one thing that could just take you out in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Man, you don't think about that either, about how much just standing is gonna be an issue for you.
Yeah. And standing with your body armor,
Yeah,
and how it like cranes your
yeah,
back for. I mean, yeah,
and
it's
then
brutal.
go to extreme conditions like Vietnam, where it was extremely
Mm,
hot and like
yeah.
9,000% humidity, right? And
Yeah.
then you went to Iraq where it's like 400 degrees and feels like
Yeah.
an oven.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that doesn't help either.
I know we
But
don't like to fight wars in nice places. I don't know
yeah,
why.
what
I
is
wish
that?
we
Like,
would.
nobody's doing it, in Hawaii, right? Which
Exactly,
obviously,
right?
thank goodness, but, no climates like Hawaii where you have nice 80-degree weather and
Yep,
some nice
yep.
beaches but yeah, that is I thought I found that there too because I'm a flat-footed person, so it's like, I know what the whole foot thing is. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. Oh, man. But, yeah, and in these, you weave in a bunch of big picture stuff too, like failed strategies, social issues, and why does that matter to for the readers of the book and the listeners here, why does that matter that, we take a look at these failed strategies and social issues?
Yeah, well, failed strategies. I mean, so often, we end up when we begin our next conflict or our next war, we're still fighting the last one.
Mhm.
Even though it was, 20, 30 years split or whatever, we're still stuck in that mindset and we didn't learn from it. And so we just basically repeat the same mistakes again and relearn the same mistakes all over again. And I think we really did that in Iraq and Afghanistan, especially in the beginning. Vietnam had such an influence on how we fought the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan from the ways that, there was no draft, so we only had a volunteer force for these past 20 years. But the way that we rotated units in and out, I mean, the way that we decided to do it was, oh, it didn't work in Vietnam, doing individual people, so we're going to do individual units. So in Vietnam, we fought wars, 1 year at a time, one person at a time. In Iraq and Afghanistan, we fought wars one unit at a time, 1 year at a time. That was the only difference. So there's all kinds of similarities like that and those mistakes that we made. So we really got to be able to understand that history, understand those strategic mistakes that we made, and examine those constantly and constantly teach
Yeah.
them in our professional military education for military officers and so on, so that we don't walk into those same minefields all over again.
And it's great to hear someone, of your position say that too, that you're in a position where you can make some of these decisions. I'm sure, you're not with the 4-star generals all the
Yeah,
time, but, being a lieutenant colonel, you're probably making some decent plans, trying to make sure that your men and women are safe in the plans
yep.
that you make. And I mean, that's a lot of weight on your shoulders.
Yeah, and it really, and so as lieutenant colonel, yeah, you can make it. You can make a big influence, not a huge influence as much as a general and so on, but you still can. And so I try to do my best with that. And to get after your second question about society, the military has to be reflective of the society that it serves. So right now in the United States, I talk about this in the book as well. There's really this gap between those who serve and those who don't. And most people who serve, they have somebody in their family who served, a father, mother, uncle, whatever it is, sister, brother, and that's what in turn then influences them to serve. So there's this real like 1% of society right now that just keeps serving, like how my family has,
Yeah, just
going all the way
recycling the
back to the yeah.
family, right?
Yeah, and so there's this real disconnect between, service and those who don't serve or have no interest to serve, or only experience that they have with the military is what they see on movies or the
Yeah.
suicide stats or the PTSD stats and things like that, and they think it's a horrible thing and they don't want anything to do with it. And then you start, hearing about people criticizing maybe females in the army or other things like that. But I feel it's important. The military has to be reflective of the society that it serves. And once that disconnect becomes irreparable, that's when a society starts getting in trouble.
And you know what, Patrick? I heard Elon Musk say something the other day about what is a country. He was talking about a country and he said a country is not the geographical region of which people live. A country is a makeup of the people that live within that geographical region. And that makes exactly the same sense with what you're saying is, you know, if we don't have the right makeup of the people, because we're only having people that have served, right? It gets a little out of touch of what maybe the rest of the folks are. But how do you, and I know we're going off topic here, but
No,
Patrick,
sorry.
do you think that there's a way that we can make military service more attractive to the people that aren't there? Because, right, that's going to come into a problem if we ever have a big war and we're only having that
Yeah.
1% volunteer, you know? Is there
Yeah,
anything that
no,
you
it
think
will
we
be.
could do?
Yeah. No, I think we are doing it. We're trying to, change our recruiting strategies, things like that. Really, if you look at the military and combat forces, most of the soldiers come from the South, the American South. And again, it's that spirit of service is real strong down there. Not to take anything away from any other states, but so yeah, I mean, how do we do that? I would hope that doing things like this, like my book, is what I'm trying to do. Connect that gap a little bit, create some understanding between both sides of that, and try to break that myth that veterans or those who serve are all robots, or that we're all
Yeah, right.
one car muffler backfiring away from going off on our communities or whatever. So trying to break all that, and then talking about, like, just a dude, like you said. I mean, the things, going from an enlisted soldier in the 101st Airborne to where I am now, I mean, I was able to do that through the Army. Anybody out there right now who, young person, man or woman, who doesn't really know what they want to do, they're looking at graduating high school here shortly. They have no idea what they want to do. I mean, look at the military. I mean, that is an easy way in our country right now that you can, once you're done with that military service, I mean, if you do it right, you can lift yourself out from poverty and become middle class at the end of that 3-year enlistment or whatever it is. And you can do that from taking advantage of the GI Bill. There's a whole number of other VA benefits and things that you can use during your time in service. Get training in a trade or whatever it is. So really look at that, and really look at it as that social platform jumping
Yeah.
point, if you will, and not look at it as this negative thing where we only take robots and you're going to get killed and come out with
And you know what
PTSD or
too,
whatever
Patrick?
else.
I think too that with all the politics and bull crap that's gone over probably last, I don't know, 16 years or so, everybody sees all these politicians all the time. And I think they forget about how great this country really is, with the bickering and stuff back and forth. And if you're not with me, you're against me. But this is such a great country. And not only can you use the military, to your advantage, but you get an opportunity to serve one of the greatest countries in the world, maybe ever in history. Don't know yet.
Yeah.
There's still, it's still, like you said, the jury's still out on that. We'll find out how we
Yeah.
keep moving forward. But the fact that, yes, you can take advantage of things that, if you're good enough shape and you can go out there, you can learn a trade. Even if you do a career like you did, I'm sure you've worked more than one job in the military, right? So there's so many opportunities there for you outside of that first enlistment as well, to move into bigger and better things. Get your education for free. You can, or pretty darn close to it, with the GI Bill if you serve your term. Trust me, you don't want to end up with 60 grand in
Yeah, definitely.
in school loans like I did. That was, trust me, it was still paying for those in my 40s.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but no, it's like, it's such a great thing. But you get to give back to a country that really has done so much for us in a way that no other country has really ever done in the
Yeah.
history of the world.
It's all
And
true. And you really meet some amazing people,
yeah,
in your
from
time in
all walks of
service.
life.
All walks
Yeah.
of life, yeah, both in and out of uniform. So it really is a amazing experience. And like I said, if you don't know what you want to do with your life, hey, join the military for 3 years and find your way. And then, if you want to stay, make it a career, do it. If not, take the benefits and go move on with your life, and
Yeah.
and definitely leverage that.
And you know what, Patrick, for most of the employers that I've worked with, and I've done some hiring and stuff, a lot of people love to hire veterans just because of that, that discipline and that sense of organization. Because we know if you've had that at least 3-4 years experience in the military, then you're going to be just fine here at this job,
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I know a lot of places now are a lot better than they used to be, and are really pushing towards hiring veterans too after they get out of the military. So there's so many more opportunities, I think, for veterans that may be available for the regular citizen, just
Yeah,
because you have
absolutely.
that skill set. So how long did it take you to write the book, Patrick?
Yeah, it took about 3.5 years from when I first put pen to paper or keyboard to Word document. It took about 3.5 years, but within those 3.5 years, we moved twice across the country. We had a baby. I got long COVID, so I was really sick for a while.
Gosh.
Yeah, so it's we took some breaks, so there was a month off here, a month off there. But yeah, it
Yeah.
took about 3.5 years.
And I mean, really, you started researching this when you were a kid, right? Because
Yeah, I mean, really,
I mean,
10 years ago, the idea kind of popped in my head that I wanted to write a book, and was kind of toying around with it. But yeah, really, the genesis of the book, yeah, is way back when I was a kid, for sure.
Yeah, which I kind of connected with because I remember, with my uncles and stuff and seeing, there was a whole bunch of Vietnam surplus back then,
Yeah.
in the
Oh,
80s
yeah.
when we grew up, so we'd be out playing war and stuff like that and all this stuff. But yeah, it was, and I had not thought about it, Patrick, until, we hooked up to talk about your book, but the similarities between Vietnam and Iraq. It blew my mind to just see where you drew these correlations and just
Yeah.
how much I learned about Vietnam. I mean, even how much I learned about Iraq, just from the time that you spent there and the information that you gave us. It's things you just don't think about, you know? So I did. I appreciated that, and I just wanted to let you know that because I think our listeners will love to see. Let me put this straight out there: it's not a history book,
Uh-huh.
even though there's some good researched history in it. It's a really good tale of how a family serves in our country today. And I just, for the listeners, make sure you go out there and take a look at it because I think it'll blow your mind with how much you learn from it in a fun way too. That's what was great about it. It wasn't just like reading a textbook, Patrick.
Yeah, yeah. No, I tried to mix it up, like it's got a little of everything. If you want that academic flavor, it's got a little bit. But if you want that human experience, it's got a lot of that. You want some war stories, it's got that.
Yep.
It's all kind of thrown in
It's like
together.
everything's in there,
Yeah.
anything that you want that could be there. Now, Patrick, when you wrote the book, did you have a certain message that you wanted to get across to people or, something that you wanted folks to get out of the book?
Yeah, I wanted to write a good book. I wanted to make it a good read, and there's a number of things that we've already talked about that I mentioned in there. About the forgotten wars of Vietnam and slowly now Iraq and Afghanistan. So I wanted people to remember that. I wanted people to walk away from it with understanding the human experience, the human toll, the generational impact that for those who serve has on just not just their themselves but their families. So all of that piece. But I want people to take away from it whatever they want to take away from it. And like you said, it's a whole kaleidoscope of stuff and not just a boring academic read or not just another war book.
Yeah,
So really,
exactly.
I wanted to create a really well written, well crafted, well researched product that people could then read and take to heart what they want and take away from it whatever they want for themselves.
Yeah, and Patrick, I think you succeeded in that from my viewpoint, but
Thank you.
I'm just a dude, so who knows about that, right? But no, I do think, and I want to encourage our listeners to really, if you've ever wondered about Vietnam or even wondered about our own war, right? And I call it our war because it was our generation, right, Patrick? And after 9/11, we were all a little salty about that. So,
Yeah,
you know, and maybe we had some bad information at the time, but you know what? I always respect our men and women that went over there, based on the information that we had at the time, thinking we were doing the right thing. And I really do think we were, regardless of the reason that we may or may not have been there. I think our men and women really did a good job in the region, considering what we had to work with
yeah,
and, how I don't want to say, but really since Vietnam, if you think about it, and you touched about this on your book, is how these wars changed from World War II to where it become more of like a social project as opposed to just, going in there, defeat the enemy, get out.
yeah, yeah. And and that's that whole victory thing. I mean, even if you look at World War II, we like to think, hey, we defeated the Germans, we defeated the Japanese Empire, we all high fived each other, and then we left. But we didn't. I mean, troops were still in Europe. I mean, that experience of World War II is still shaping Europe today and how people view their own histories and how they're then using that to message how they want to change their own cultures and so on, namely speaking of Russia and so on. And so all of that, the war does not just end. There's no parade at the end of it, even when there was or when we thought there was for
Yeah,
like World
right.
War II and so on. Vietnam, you look at Vietnam today, they're one of our closest allies. Iraq, Afghanistan, extremely challenging operational environments that we like to lump together, but they really were two completely different wars.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting, how we as the general public, people who not a lot of military background and stuff, view a war and they watched this thing unfold for 2 decades in Iraq and Afghanistan and administration after administration saying victory's right around the corner and
Yeah.
thinking that, "Oh, it's gonna be another parade and we're gonna be good and everything's gonna be great," and obviously it's still not, and so there's a real messaging problem there, I think, between politicians and through the general public as
Oh,
well
I
every
agree
time we
with you.
serve a conflict.
Absolutely. I don't think I definitely don't think that the government itself, and I'm not talking about the military, but the government itself doesn't really lay out good plans or good information as to why we're still there, right? Or what we're trying to accomplish. which in, like with the insurgent with you, we talk about we go into an area, but we don't just, and forgive my language, we don't just blow the shit out of an area and leave, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
generally go back and rebuild it then,
Yeah. You
you
break it, you
know?
buy it.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it's like, when people just think we leave the people to fend for themselves, that's definitely not it. And I think that's probably a huge change from way back. Wars were fought, you just killed people, and whoever had the most people left was the winner.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
now we go into war to try to stop it. Generally, it's like a dictator like Saddam Hussein, right? Or,
Yeah.
someone we're going after, with ISIS or whatever it may be. So we're trying to stop one person without having that collateral damage, which I think makes it even harder to fight a war, doesn't it? I
It
mean,
does, and that's part of that messaging. It's the West, especially the United States. It's our obsession with limited wars.
mhm,
So we tried to go into Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan with the least amount of input and expected the most maximum amount of results. Whereas World War II, total mobilization, total war footing, everybody got behind it, and we went into the conflict and completely committed. Whereas Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, we tried to do this half-ass commitment policy, limited amount of and so we have this obsession with short wars where we're going to just launch a bunch of tomahawks. We're just going to put some boots on the ground and think that the war is going to end, and we're going to just be able to walk out of there successfully. And it's just has not proven itself in Vietnam, and again in Iraq and Afghanistan, we did the same thing all over again. My thing is, if our national security, or excuse me, our national level politicians decide that we need to go into a conflict, then we need to go into a conflict. We need to be
yeah.
100% committed, go on a complete
No,
war footing. If we think that that's worth it, then that's the posture that we need to take, and not do these half-assed,
yeah,
approaches that we keep doing.
and Patrick, I don't know if I'm, misinformed because obviously I haven't been in the military. I mean, I did spend a couple of semesters in ROTC, which trust me is
Nice.
not the military, but
Yeah, yeah.
I did try to go that route, but knee problems caused me to
Nice.
not. But the that's one thing that I always wondered was, I know that we want to, we don't want people to look at our country as an enemy, which is why we do a lot of the rebuilding and stuff. But, I always wondered, our war fighters, our military is meant to be war fighters, right? That's what we train to do. We train to kill the enemy. And, I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything here, but it's like sometimes I feel we go into these conflicts and they just tie our military, one of our hands behind our backs, instead of just letting us go in, do what we do best, and then, let's worry about the rebuilding after. Let us go in, win the conflict, then we can rebuild,
Yeah, that's
Whereas it seems
total,
like,
yeah.
doesn't it seem like Vietnam and Iraq was kind of like trying to do the war part and the after effect at the same time, And I think that, it just seems like that might have been one of those things too, where our hands were tied because we're trying to be a positive, function in the region. But in the end, we're foreigners,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, we have too many objectives tagged onto to one person or one entity. So, you've got the army going in, and then you want them to be warfighters, but you also want them to be statesmen at the same time, and you want them to be rebuilding civil affairs, all that type of stuff, all at the same time. And it's just not as successful. You have different organizations that can do that. You have,
Yeah.
Department of State, all those types of things. They're the ones who are supposed to take that responsibility on. So there's really, like, again, it all goes back to that limited amount of input, expecting the maximum amount of results. So you come up with too many objectives, you tag it onto one entity or one person, expect them to execute, and they just get quickly overwhelmed.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right because you're putting too much stuff into one pile
Yeah,
without the resources to support it,
yeah,
you
exactly.
know?
Yeah,
So, well, Patrick, it's great to hear about the book. And, we talked a little bit about your background, but I just wanted to ask you some other questions just so people could see where, how your background has really led to
sure.
this book and where you're at. But you've done cool non-war stuff too.
Yeah,
Obviously you've been to Iraq, but, we talked about your DC gigs working with senators, the Department of Labor. I believe you work with them as well. Right. And so what is the wildest thing you learned about how the sausage gets made in Washington that you can
yeah,
tell us
yeah,
about?
yeah, yeah. No, so DC, I mean, fascinating place. Really kind of four things that really come out of DC. My time, my experience there. And that's one is that it's very transactional. Everybody there is trying to get something from somebody, and the way they're doing that is they're horse trading, political horse trading. Hey, if you vote for my bill, I'll support your bill. If you make a sacrifice here, I'll make a sacrifice, or I'll give you this. I'll support your bill if you
Mhm.
sacrifice something there. So that's kind of the biggest thing is how transactional everything is. And then with that, relationships matter. So
Yeah, I'm sure.
it's really like you have to have a good reputation if you're in DC working as congressional staff or even one of the federal agencies because your reputation is like everything. So if you're known as kind of a backstabber or somebody who jumps ship if somebody's not going to get reelected or something like that, that follows you, and then that's going to hurt you when you're trying to do that transactional stuff because
Yeah.
you're kind of known as, oh, that's a real slimy person, so we'll stay away from them. And then really the biggest thing you kind of learn when you're up there is that most of it is theater.
Yeah,
All
I
the
kind of
things you're
figured that too,
seeing,
yeah.
so all those, the speeches that they're giving and the news interviews that they're giving and on the Senate floor or on the House floor and so on. A lot of it is theater, and so you may see, members of Congress yelling at each other in public, and then the door closes and they're like, "Hey, buddy, you want to get some coffee? Like, what are you doing
Yeah.
next week?
"Hey,
How's
let's
your
go to the
daughter
bar and get a
doing?"
beer," right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's real. A lot of it is stage acting, and it's so again very transactional. Your reputation really matters, and then that theater.
Yeah.
But I will say that I've watched over the years that that theater is starting to kind of go away, and a lot of that animosity is now becoming more real.
Yeah.
So that's really a concerning development because before you knew that when people were bad mouthing each other on the floor or on
It was
news and
just
so
for
on,
show,
it was for
right?
show. But now it's like it's for real, and you can see that it's very personal.
Yeah.
So that's kind of concerning a little bit.
And it makes me wonder, Patrick, how did we get that way? Because,
Yeah,
when you and I grew up, right, in the 90s, late 80s or, 90s time, I
yeah,
always remember, yeah, there was always Republicans and Democrats, right? But it always seemed like at some point they'd get together and get something done. But
yeah.
now it's like they don't get shit done.
Yeah, it's over the years, it's gotten worse and worse, and, if you look at congressional history and, especially American Civil War time, I mean, there's, different
Yeah.
parties there having duels and stuff, they're like
Yeah.
they're like caning each other on the floor and
Right.
stuff.
Yeah. Right on the steps of Congress, they're having a
Yeah,
duel, right?
right, so
Pistol
it's
duel.
a little bit different, and, I will say if you were to resurrect the founding fathers today and show them what was going on, they would say, "Hey, this is exactly what we wanted. We wanted, everybody to have checks and balances, and we want to try to do the most amount of good for the most amount of people. And the way we do that is through these three branches and all these checks and balances." And so I think they would be like, "This is exactly what's supposed to happen. There's supposed to be a debate, and there's supposed to
Yeah.
be." And so it's gotten to a point where it's harder to break through those deadlocks. I think
Yes.
it's the news media. I think feeds to that, and my book talks about that a little bit. Is
Yep.
how
So much.
yeah, and the way the media feeds to it too, which I think is kinda ridiculous, is let's say 10 years ago, I'm a congressional member and I had an opinion on something, and then 10 years later, I changed my mind, and the
Yep.
media, based on research, experience, visiting the people that are effective, well, the media is not gonna let me get away with that. They'd be like, "Well, 10
No.
years ago, you said that, fracking was bad or fracking was good." And it's like, "Okay, well, now I learned some more science about it, and I'm a human being, and I've informed myself,
Exactly. And
but they
that's
don't
what
let
I
you get
said.
away with that."
You know what? We saw two perfect examples in this last election of that, right? With Kamala
Yeah,
Harris, right? She
yeah,
said no, she was 100% against fracking, and then she changed her mind. And like you said,
right,
everybody gave her crap for it.
yeah.
But then on the other side, we had the same thing. We had JD Vance, who said he was a never Trumper, and now he's the vice president.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah,
it's like,
and
listen,
so
people can change their mind. It's
exactly,
okay.
they're human beings, yeah, and so that's what's I think the media really has a big part in the breaking the preventing of the breaking of these deadlocks and things getting
Yep,
along because
I think you're right.
if you cross the aisle and you get massacred, if you change your
Yeah,
opinion on something, you get massacred, and so it's really kinda silly, and that's I think is the root of our problem for a lot of the stuff going on today.
and you know what's funny though, too, Patrick, is that I think most people I've talked with are more of the reserve of not, it's either my way or the highway, but they're more like, you know what, we can find common ground and come together and get something done, and they're like, and I think that's what we need to get away with. It's either I'm right and you're wrong, or,
Yeah.
vice versa. It's like, no, neither one of us is probably right,
Yeah,
but I think we
exactly,
could find some type of compromise to get what we both want to help move the country forward, because at least for the last 6 to 8 years, Congress hasn't really done anything.
yeah, it's
I
really
mean, other
challenging,
than passing raises for themselves, they've, but no, yeah, I didn't want to get stuck on that, but I thought, you having some insight in there, as an advisor and being with the Congress that's pretty cool that you got to see some of that, because you got to see stuff that most people would probably never see.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We got to be behind the doors between meetings between high level, politicians and general officers and so on, and really seeing, like you said, how that sausage was being made. And
Yeah.
Yeah, fast. I can't really talk about too much
Yeah,
exacts about it, but
exactly.
it
Yeah,
was really
I don't mean to
fascinating
get you, and I don't
experience.
want
Yeah.
to get you in trouble
No,
either.
no.
But no, that's it's good to know though that you're there, and I think that's how most of us think that Washington works. But it would be nice to see them get along a little bit better and do a
Yeah.
little bit more for the American people. And now you're at Fort Leavenworth, right, shaping the
Hmm.
next wave of officers.
Yep.
So, what is one thing that you tell them that you wish someone would have told you early on?
Yeah, I would, and this kind of gets back to the premise of the podcast of just a dude, and once you start getting into higher ranks, so the students here are learning to become field grades, so majors and lieutenant colonels. So most of them come here as a captain or a junior major, and we want to make them transition into that next step to lead at that operational level slash strategic once they get a little bit past that. And one of the things, I try to infuse in them is to remember that you are a person, that you're not this grandiose person now who has this higher rank who can now, lord over people or whatever it is. Really is, learning how to lead with empathy at this point up into your careers right now, you've been a captain and below. And so if
Hmm.
you're an infantry captain or below, you've only served with for fellow infantry officers. But once you get into a major and a lieutenant colonel, now you're serving with officers from all different branches, everything from medical to chemical to armored or infantry, whatever it is. So you've got to learn to lead with a little bit more empathy. You've got to learn how to find a value in each person. So, in the when you're in those junior ranks, it's very direct leadership, like do this now and you need to just figure it out. When you get more into that senior rank, you need to learn how to develop people a little bit more, find their strengths
Hmm.
and weaknesses, and then develop that and use them into play to their strengths while, mitigating their weaknesses.
Yeah,
And then with that, you've got to also understand that at some point, you're now at this senior leadership level. And after you've tried to mentor somebody, work with their strengths and their weaknesses, and they still can't cut the muster, for some people, that's just the way that it is. And you've got to take the organization into consideration and you've got to separate that person from the organization. So that's the other thing. And then the last thing is getting after being just a dude is understanding that imposter syndrome is a very real thing. So, when you can find yourself sitting in a room in Congress all of a sudden and you think back to your roots in Hawaii and that middle class upbringing and you're like, what the heck am I doing here? Do I really belong here? Remember that you've gotten to that point on your own, unless you're like a really rich person with a lot of, influential
exactly.
friends or whatever. You've earned your way into that room. And so remember to tell yourself that and reflect on that anytime you have like that imposter syndrome, type of moment. So that's really
Yeah.
the kind of things I try to infuse.
And Patrick, you know what? That last part, the imposter syndrome, I think that gets me, every
Yeah.
time because same thing, like, from a military, perspective where you work yourself up from a private and, you went enlisted, now you're in the officer corps. And it's like, for me, it was the same thing, started working like as a security guard, then became a
Yeah.
cop. Then I went to school. Then, I started working in IT. But you get that imposter where you're like, I shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
I should be the guy like, I don't know, slinging burgers down there.
Yeah.
It's so weird that your roots kind of put you down there and you do feel like, oh man, should I even be here? Am I good
Yeah.
enough to be here? You get yourself, but you're absolutely right. If you're there, it's for a reason,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
you earned it. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
But
I mean,
that it's
sometimes
that.
there's people get put into positions, right? We all know that there's those people that get into a position. You're like, I have no idea how that guy got there, but
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's
but
true.
most
Somehow
of
it
us make it.
happens.
Yeah, most of us got there through hard work.
Yeah. But those humble roots, they can like you just mentioned, they can sometimes play in the background of your psyche and so on and maybe bring you down a little bit. But they can also be a strength, right? Because you can leverage that and maintain that humility and
Exactly.
be able to relate to other people who have come up the hard way as you have and so on. So that's why it's a weakness, but it's also a strength. And I would think it is
Yeah.
worth reflecting on sometimes.
Yeah, and I think, for those of us that grew up in a, maybe a lower middle class family or a middle class family, I think we also know too a lot of times that we learn the best from those leaders that lead by example and not by words.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not willing to get out there and do the things with your men, then, they're going to look down on you. And that's where I always come from, right? I remember what it was like being at the bottom there. And I think that's
Yeah.
what helps folks that move up, from the bottom to the higher levels is that we remember, right?
Oh,
We
I
remember
agree.
what it was like to be, like for you doing those 20-mile ruck marches,
Yeah.
and in the wet and the rain and cold. And so what your guys are through. So you're going to use that experience to make the best decisions that you can for your men to help, alleviate some of that impact and give them a better outcome than you had. And I think
Yeah.
we all all learn from that, you know?
No, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. All right, Patrick, you ready for you're the second person to do the lightning round of dude
All right, I'm
questions.
ready.
So here we go. Just to lighten things up, just quick answers, no
Yeah.
overthinking, but go as long as you want on your answers. So, all right, first question. Favorite Hawaii food you miss the most?
A Kahlua pig, and
Kalu-
that's a pig that's cooked in the ground. I don't know if you ever had it, but it's very salty with the Hawaiian sea salt, cooked in the ground for hours in an imu. It comes out very, very, very tender. So that's definitely the biggest thing.
That Yeah, that sounds I have not had it, but I've seen it, you know, in some movies and stuff and had some friends that they're like, "Oh, it's the best. It's the best you'll ever have." Awesome. Toughest day in Iraq, think it back. What kept you going?
Yeah, I think toughest day through anything is just looking towards something for the future. For Iraq, obviously, it's when you're going to redeploy. That's the easy one. But anytime you're in a tough situation, looking at all right, what's on the other end of this, and try to focus on that.
Yeah, that's great advice for anybody, you know, just hear what you do, but focus on the long haul, not the short
Yep.
short
Yep.
term, right?
Yeah.
All right. If you could grab a beer or whatever your preferred beverage is
Yeah.
with a historical military figure, who's it going to be?
Ulysses S. Grant. That's the easy one.
I
But
would
I
have said the
probably
same thing. Yep.
yeah.
I like it. I thought the same thing. It was either him or Patton. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, a lot of
yeah.
people like Patton. Yeah. No, Grant for
But
sure. I
I
mean,
think Grant definitely, yeah.
yeah. I probably wouldn't have brought any alcohol around him because he kind of struggled with that, but
Yeah.
yeah. No, and he's
Exactly.
fascinating because he was an amazing military leader and a not so great
Yep.
president.
Yeah,
Same
you're
as
right.
Eisenhower, amazing military leader, not so great president.
Not so great president.
Yeah,
Exactly. It doesn't necessarily transition
it
well, does it?
doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
All right. One song that pumps you up before a big mission or a writing session.
Yeah, that's interesting. I need quiet.
Do you?
Yeah, I
You know
can't
what?
have
I'm the
music.
same way. I'm so used to asking questions like that because I know a lot of people like to get pumped up or listen to
Yeah.
music or hear. I'm like, I need complete silence.
Yep, I need to
You
be
know?
quiet so I could reflect, take some
Yep.
deep breaths. Everybody stay away from me.
I love it. It's
Gather my
funny as
thoughts. Yeah, that's not, I
yeah.
can't
I'm the
do it with
same as
music.
you. I'm not going with any music beforehand. I just want to be in
Yep.
a nice quiet area, relaxed, and just let it go.
Yep.
Excellent. So that wasn't too bad, was it? That was
Oh,
it.
yeah,
Just a
no, it's
couple of
good.
questions.
Easy.
Excellent. So, Patrick, what else would you like our listeners to know? I know we're getting close to the end of our hour, but what else would you like them to know about your book? And then, obviously, let's hear where we can get it.
Yeah, no, so you can get it, I have a website and my author's page that I've got all my articles in the book, and it's just patnaughton.com. So PATN as in November, AUGHTON.com. So I prefer Patrick, but patricknaughton.com was already
Was already
taken.
taken.
Yeah, so I had to go
Exactly. I know.
patnaughton.com. Yeah, so that's what I went with. But yeah, through there you can get links to the book. It's through Casemate Publishers. They're one of the they are the biggest, military history, military themed book publisher, both here in the US and in the UK. Get it directly through them. Barnes and Noble has it. Amazon obviously has it, but you can just Google it, Born from War, my name, Patrick Naughton, and a whole bunch of different bookstores will pop up that have it. So you can get it through that. And really, I think, last thing to for the audience is, as people are maybe listening to this podcast, we've talked about like a lot of, strategic type stuff and conversations, and then maybe thinking like, I don't really have an interest in that. I don't really understand that. But, the problem with our, national security, those great strategic minds that are planning our policies at that level and so on, is that they've kind of lost the connection with that common man and woman, that everyday person. So when they're formulating all these policies and all these strategies and so on, they don't really take that common sense perspective or that common sense approach to it. So I would, say just as a dude, it's our mission to insert ourselves into those types of conversations, because you have to be like, all right, bro, I know you have like 5 different Ivy League degrees and I hear what you're saying, but that just doesn't make any sense. And here's why
No.
from a common sense perspective. And so going back to that imposter syndrome, if you find yourself in those situations, don't be afraid to speak up and say, hey, I have firsthand experience with exactly what you're just talking about, and I'm going to tell you right now that's not going to work.
Yeah.
So I would
And
say,
you know what?
that's
I just want to bounce off that real quick, Patrick, too, and just say, and do say it. And even if they don't
mhm,
take what you say, at least you gave them the opportunity,
yeah,
right? You can't
yep,
always control what other people can do, but if you know that something is wrong, you got to at least say something about it,
yep, yep,
and maybe not even wrong. Maybe wrong's too strong of a word, But if you know something that doesn't really seem like it's going to work out, speak up, say something.
Yeah, like you say, if you're a police officer, and you've worked that beat for so long and you've got, now you've got a new chief coming in saying, "Oh, here's what we're gonna do." And you're gonna be like, "All right, sir, well, I
It's
know
like,
the people that's it's not gonna work."
yep. It's like, listen, Jimmy Bob over there who drinks, a
Yeah,
30 pack in 15 minutes before he even gets out of bed.
yeah,
He's not going to take to that too well,
yeah,
and you got
exactly,
to
yeah,
tell him too. And, one of the things, and Patrick, I don't know, your folks might do this too, but I always tell people if you're going to bring something or, I don't even say an opinion, but your view to something, make sure you can back it up with
yeah,
an example too, to let people
yeah,
understand, that you have been there and actually do it. And just like we talked about before, leading by experience, not by words,
yeah. No, that's a very good point. Yeah,
but yeah, no,
absolutely.
I love that because you're right. If you notice something's wrong, especially I would say it's even more detrimental in the military, you better
Yep.
say something because it could mean somebody's life
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
sure. But yeah, excellent. No, Patrick, thank you so much for that. For the listeners to know, all of Patrick's information is going to be on justadudepodcast.com. He's going to, on our show guest, he'll have his own page with all of his links, and you'll see his photo there as well. So you'll be able to go through there and be able to order Patrick's books as well. Patrick, anything else that you want to
No,
talk
that's
about?
it. I really appreciate you
Awesome.
having me on. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, that's it for today, folks. A big thanks to Patrick Naughton. Go check out patnaughton.com for more on this dude. If you like this, smash that subscribe button, leave us a review, and tell your crew. We're out of here for today. We'll catch you on the next episode of Just a Dude Podcast.